G'day guys, you're back with MiracleMAX. Today, as you can see, I'm not in the workshop but out in the garden. Mrs. Miracle has asked me to mow the lawn, but unfortunately the whippersnipper will not start, and it's even less inclined when it does start to idle. Such a shame. Well, let's see if we can fix it. It's been sitting in the workshop for some time now, and I've tried to avoid repairing it, but Mrs. Miracle really wants the lawn done, so got to get into it. I've just topped it up with fuel, and we prime it 8 times according to the little sign on the side here. We turn it to the on position with the switch, we hold the throttle flat, we put the choke on all the way, and in theory it should start straight away. Not happy. Just to prove that I've got spark okay, I've pulled the spark plug out, kept it attached to my lead, and I'm providing earth via this cable here, which I'm going to attach to the crankcase. So I've just come into the workshop purely for filming purposes. It's a little bit bright out in the sun, and besides, every time I'm out in the garden it reminds me that I've got the lawn to mow. Eek. So here's the spark plug hooked up to the plug lead, and I've got this clamp here going down from here down to the crankcase on the side here. Does it have spark? Let's see. Oh, nice. So if spark is okay, what should we check next? Let's have a look at the air filter to make sure that that's not blocked, and then we'll look at fuel. As mentioned, if I do happen to get this thing up and running, it idles like a pig. In fact, it loves to cut out, and then it's really hard to start afterwards. I believe that the two are related. So if I do happen to get this thing up and running, I want to show you what I feel may be the problem with it before it stalls out. Let's see if we can get it up and running firstly. Just let it idle a bit, add some more aero start type stuff. See that? The reason being is because this gasket here, where are you? Where you gone, people? There you go. This gasket in here may have a split in it. It's sucking in air normally, but when I richen it up with this stuff, then of course it dies down because of overfueling. But unfortunately the crankcase, the head has to be pulled off the crankcase. It involves a bit of work, but hey, we've got to do it. So we're going to start by pulling off this particular housing here. I'm not sure what else we'll need to do. Most likely the carby, etc. The fuel tank, and I'll see what happens. But I'll start with this housing here, the carby assembly and the fuel tank. I've pulled that back cover off, as you can see, and including this particular section here, which actually goes into the crankcase. And there we have the bottom section, or the crankshaft that's exposed, and this is where the fuel tank sat before. That bit there holds that in place. So I've pulled all that off now, got that out the road, that's all good. Now we really need to go around the front to get this section off next. Next on the disassemble list are these screws here, and the clutch housing is held in behind that. So 1, 2, 3, 4. This will then slide out of the clutch assembly. It's on a shaft and a spline. Pop that off next. Now that I've pulled those screws off there, the 4 screws, this flexible cable will come out here, out of our clutch assembly. It's just a matter of undoing our throttle cable here. Take that screw off there, and of course our 2 electrical connectors here, and then we can separate the whole lot together. Max muscles. Yeah. Right, that fella's gone. 4 screws come out of this housing, one here, one here, one here, and of course this one I've already taken out for the throttle cable bracket. Just note that this particular screw is longer than the others, and that's the one that held in the throttle cable bracket. After those 4 screws are removed, we can just simply pull this cover off, and that exposes our entire motor or our engine. Of course, this is the fella that we need to pull off, the cylinder head as opposed to the crankcase, and I believe that there should be a broken piece of gasket in here somewhere. That's what we're doing next, pop this fella off. So without getting overly excited, we should be able to just flip this over and take off 1, 2, 3, I believe. I'll pop them off and we'll have a look anyway. 3 screws out, not a problem. The only thing I'd recommend is pulling out your spark plug, because as I pull this off, I'm fighting against the compression of the cylinder itself. So I'd pull off my plug lead there as well as my plug. But the beauty about this thing, of course, is that these are a needle roller bearing, and they simply just, if you wiggle it, you should be able to, in theory, wait for it folks, wait for it, bring the piston down a little bit and it just pops completely off. So you don't have to pull the piston out of the bore at all, which is excellent. So this here is the gasket that I believe is the issue. This bloke right here. And I believe it's failing in this area here. It's quite thin, and considering that it's a compression sealing gasket, it's yeah, pretty dodgy. But I'm going to make my own. Unfortunately, these things, you can buy them, but they're about 50 bucks. Hell no, that's not going to happen. I'm going to make my own. I've carefully removed the gasket from the crankcase, and as you can see, it didn't fare too well. It was baked on there quite hard. But generally speaking, I'll just trace around that, but we might have to try another method. I'll show you that method shortly. As you can see, I've just bought some gasket material. In this particular case, 0.8 of a mil. Don't know if that's going to work, but we'll see how we go. But it's got to be in better condition than this fella right here, hey. For starters, what we want to do is cut a section, just a square section, doesn't matter what it looks like, something so it's just going to fit in this particular area over here, and then we'll focus on getting it right. Look, everyone has their own method of creating a gasket or making a gasket. I'll show you the method that I use, I prefer to use anyway, because as I said, this is the bloke that we need to make, and yeah, not overly happy with tracing around that. So what I do is you fit it into place as best as you can. Use a small ball peen hammer and just sort of wipe it around there, I guess you could say, and eventually you'll start to see the shape take place. Now don't panic too much, because it's not this side that we're concerned about, it's the other side, and when you can feel that there's a bolt hole there, so just use the ball peen itself to push into that, and that should create the hole that you're looking for. So just keep going around till you're happy with it, wipe it around, and that in turn, you can use both sides of course, especially on the sharp edges around here, we can get that shape happening. So if we pull it off and turn it over, you should be able to see the shape take place, and of course it's just a matter of cutting it out accordingly and making sure that it is the same shape as what you've just traced out here. Of course there's a few areas like this I probably didn't focus on, but when I trace it out, I'll draw it out and then cut it out, I should be able to get something very, very similar. As long as you get a decent light on it, you can usually see where the edges are, so I can cut that out no problems. And of course, as a backup or as a guide, you could always use your old one and just lay it on there to make sure that you're getting the correct shape. So you can see I've been able to trace it out with a pencil. The only area that I haven't done as yet is this area that got damaged, but that'll obviously be where the screw hole goes, but I'll sort that out shortly. And you can use a Stanley knife to cut the remaining area on the inside. So as you can see, it's a work in progress. There's a few little areas that I need to tidy up, particularly in this area here, I suppose. Not sure what that is used for, but I'll make sure that I cut that out. Then I'll use a hole punch to do the bolt holes or screw holes. So you notice that there is a hole here, so that's obviously an important part that I make sure that I get right. As for these little tangy bits that hang out the side, I believe they're just to locate the gasket in here and here. So I don't believe that they serve too much of a purpose, but I'll make sure that they're okay anyway. I'll tidy them up with scissors now that I can get to the inside of the hole. One thing to keep in mind is making sure that you scrape off all of the gasket before you try and do this. You can see I've left a little bit there, and there's a chunk here that I didn't see as well, and that's why I didn't get a defined area to do my the screw hole there. So just make sure you scrape everything off perfectly. That's my fault. When I use a hole punch to punch the holes, I prefer to do it on something metal, as in perhaps a vise. If I do it on something timber, as the punch goes down, it actually just frays the edges of the gasket rather than making it a clear, sharp, defined hole. So I'll just do it over on the vise. Now, I'll be the first to admit it's not the most attractive gasket, but I believe it'll work fine. Some of these holes were a little bit skew-if, and this one is a fraction off. I also used a hole punch to punch out that little indentation there to allow for that, I assume that's probably some air vent of some description going into the crankcase. So yeah, I'm happy with that gasket, that'll be fine. And of course I've got to clean up all my surfaces, both over here on my crankcase itself and onto the head, and make sure they're spotless. Don't use any silicone on this, the gasket material itself is enough. So I'll just pop it back together. I'm going to do this gasket here as well while it's off. That's part of the crankcase as well. Remember that, that way dopey. It holds on the fuel tank down here, and that becomes part of the crankcase as well. So we don't want any leaking whatsoever. So this is the gasket here, shouldn't be too hard to make. So I've cut this gasket out for this particular one. Here's the old one over here, and that's the new one that I've cut. It's a little bit more successful than the other one. Might even have another shot at that other one for the crankcase, but that slides on nicely, and as you can see all the holes line up, and I'm pretty happy with that. So yep, that's good, that one's done. I'll have a shot at that crankcase now. I've spent some extra time making another crankcase gasket, and look, I'm pretty happy with the results. It's a lot better than the last one. Here's the last one. I didn't get the holes right and it was a bit dodgy on the inside, but this one here seems to fit a lot better. So if we pop him on there, it's the holes line up much better, and if we put it onto the head itself, it fits on a lot better too. So yeah, I'm happy with that. So it's just a matter of lining everything up and popping it all back together, hey. So the main thing that we need to make sure that we've done, of course, is that our gasket's in the correct position. I believe this hole might be used to draw in vacuum for the carby. That's what I think it might be. Might be wrong. If you know any different, put in the comments. So make sure that this needle roller bearing, or the big end bearing, is lined up correctly with our crankshaft. Once we get it lined up, it's just a matter of sticking it through there, popping it on and sliding it into place like that. Now keep in mind that these bolts come from below in here, 1, 2, 3, and I did notice also that they have had Loctite or some sort of thread locker on them at some time. So I'll be just using a thread locker, just a tiny bit on there, to make sure that no vibrations will release those screws, and of course we'd lose compression then, wouldn't we? So that's all back together, no problems there. I'm going to leave this off for the moment because that section goes on that way, but it also holds in the fuel tank down here, so I'm going to leave that off just for now, making sure that I clean out this crankcase area before I put it back together. So the next section that goes on is this little cover here. This shaft here has to come through that hole there, but just keep in mind that this spark plug needs to be located around there, and then it comes through there. It's just got to go over that little ledge there, I believe, so it doesn't get caught. So we gently wiggle as we always do, and hopefully it should go back together. And it locks into place nicely. 4 screws. Just keep in mind this fella over here is the bracket for the throttle cable, so leave that one off for now. So 1, 2, 3, put him back together. It's also a good idea as you assemble it back together just to make sure that everything rotates okay, nothing's binding, I'm happy with that motion there. Sometimes perhaps the clutch assembly in here may jam against the teeth and not locate properly, but generally speaking it wouldn't pull down quite easily. But yeah, nice free movement, happy with that. Next is the shaft. I was actually surprised how easily this went back together. I've seen on YouTube some other whippersnipper or line trimmers, as some people call them, or even weed whackers, that get pulled back together and you've got to pull this off and then disassemble the clutch, blah 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 blah. Not in this case. Easy peasy, buckets of sneezy. You simply slide your flexible shaft in there, and that should, I'm hoping, should actually just pull in. And now it's going to make a liar of me. Nice. Now, why is that not going in? Perhaps I've popped it off the other end. Oh, I did too. Silly boy, Max. There's a trick for young players. Okay, I must have accidentally pulled out the flexible shaft and out of the head assembly itself up the other end, and that didn't locate, therefore it was sticking out this end. It's gone back in and I can feel the friction of the head, and I can see the head moving on the other side as well. So that should, after all that braggatry there, Max, should just slide in and go together. Sweet. 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, as far as I know, these Y connectors should go together either. Basically, it's an earthing out of the magneto that turns it off anyway. It's a switch, basically. So they should go in either way. I don't believe that there is a proper way to do it, because otherwise they would have changed the connectors vice versa. Sweet. Okay, what have we got next? Cable can go on. We'll adjust that when we put our carby on. Just before, someone had their own whippersnipper going off in the background, going full noise. Feeling a little bit jealous, but this will be up and running shortly. And then I've got to do the lawn. Oh, goody. While I was storing this little fuel tank, and it has a little bit of fuel in it, overnight it will force the fuel out of either past these threads or out through here. That's not unusual, so don't panic about it. Just make sure you put the fuel container in a enclosed container so that the fuel doesn't go all over your bench. But you can get rid of that simply by releasing the pressure that's built up inside. These caps have a one-way valve in them. You can test them simply by putting on a hose there and then sucking on that hose to see if the valve will open and shut. And that is to draw atmospheric pressure in so that it doesn't create a vacuum within inside the tank. But just check that little valve there and it should be honky-dory. You may notice here on the bottom of the crankcase there's 2 little nibbly bits, knobs that stick out there, and that's to hold the fuel tank on. So make sure you put these little rubber bungs in place. Those 2 knobby bits go in here, and on the other side, if we flip the tank around, there's a single one, which in turn goes into the crankcase cover. You can see that knobby bit there, which has its own little rubber bung. So make sure you assemble them correctly before you put all this back together. And don't forget to make sure that your crankcase is clean inside. Just double check my work again. Everything's free, I'm happy with that. So we should be able to locate all this together. Once I get my act together and my gasket on and everything else, it goes that way. That looks pretty good from here. Okay, carby next. And just because I've caught the gasket making bug, I decided to make a carby gasket as well. Check it out, pretty cool, huh? Here's the old one that I based it on. It's a bit on the dodgy side. It was getting a bit flat in areas, so I've decided to make a new one. So, does this new one fit? Let's check it out. Put him there, and hey, that's pretty good, I'm thinking. All right, let's assemble it. The carby's now back in place. I've placed these hoses, the intake and the return, in the correct manner. I've put the gasket on properly. I've got the end plate here which holds the air filter cover. That's in place correctly. Spark plug's back in place, and all I've got to do is put on my end cover, which keeps the exhaust away from your little pinkies. And of course my air filter, which is clean. I've just cleaned it recently. That can go back together. Let's see if it works. It's pretty blowy out here today. Not real great for someone who has hay fever. Anywho, the question on everybody's mind is, will this thing start? So we've got it in the on position. We need to choke it. Now this, we'll just set him up there. We'll prime him the 8 times. Will it idle? That's the question. Still needs a bit of adjustment on the carby. Well, it's got a few little issues I've got to sort out, tune it a bit better, but at least it's idling, hey? I think I'll need to readjust my settings here at the carby, the high and the low settings, because they've been adjusted previously and now they're out because of the repair that's been carried out. So after quite a bit of fiddling around with the high and low settings, I believe I've got it pretty right. But as you know, the only way to check is to do a proper, thorough road test. Damn it, I've got to do the whippersnipping, mow the lawn. Mrs. Miracle wins again. Ah. Okay, well I believe that's enough for proof of concept. It works fine. I suppose I better get into it fully, do the whippersnipping, line trimming, whatever you guys want to call it, and then do the entire lawn. Got to keep Mrs. Miracle happy. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video today, and I better get out of here before I get blown away. If you did enjoy this video and you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Give it a like, feel free to comment down below, and hey, don't forget about that notification bell. You don't want to miss any future videos. So until next time, when there's less wind around, this is MiracleMAX signing off. I will catch you later.